So we are on top of the hour and we can start the meeting. Welcome everyone. This is the session of the core working group at IETF 120. I am Marco Tiloca. My co-chairs are Jaime Jimenez and Kirsten Bormann. And today we also have in the room Laurent Totan as in-person delegate. Again, thank you very much for having us out. And as usual, we assume people at the meeting, especially those engaging in active discussion, to have read the documents in the agenda for today. We want to make good use of our time here to advance the document status and solve any open issues. The note well applies, more in details on the next slide. Your participation is recorded automatically. Please, especially those in the room on site, don't forget to log into Meet Echo to be correctly tracked. We have at least 2 minute takers, Christian and Richard. Thanks a lot. But everyone can find the link to the minutes in the chat. Please help out taking notes collectively. And I'll keep a look at the chat. So this is an official IETF meeting. The note well applies. It's also about IPR patents and so on. You are supposed to disclose your knowledge of IPRs related to what is discussed here, if you discuss those topics, or you can refrain from discussing altogether as an alternative. But even more important, it is about our code of conduct. So please be professional and nice with one another. Some practicalities. This meeting is recorded per the note 12. If you participate on site, again, be sure to log into the Meet Echo, preferably using the on-site tool on your mobile. If you prefer to use the full-fledged client on your browser, be sure to keep your audio and video off. And if you want to join the queue on the mic, please join the queue first on Meet Echo and then go to the mic. For remote participants, please keep your video off unless you're presenting or actively speaking at the mic queue. And if you can, please use a headset. If you cannot send audio and it's your turn to talk and so on, you can type mic on the chat and we'll relay your comment or question for you. Okay, this is the agenda for today, and after the chair's introduction, we have Kirsten covering 2 slots on the Core Conf cluster first, and then on the Constraint Resource Identifiers, or href work. Bill will give an update on the conditional attribute document, and then Martin will cover an update on DNS over co-op and main item together with a number of related documents around it. And they will be followed by also a related document in that respect, co-op transport indication, for which Christian will present an update. I'll present an update on the work on observed multicast notifications, and then Richard will follow with updates on items related to the OSCORE security protocol as used at proxies, or concerning the update of keying material or identifiers for OSCORE. And lastly, we'll have Carles presenting updates on 2 documents for co-op over the bundle protocol and in space. Does anyone want to bash this agenda? Heard none. And reading none, let's continue with the document status. And first of all, we published since Brisbane RFC in 9423 on the new registry, very much awaited for coordinating the use of target attributes. Carsten, you want to add something about that?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most boring drafts I have ever wrote, but we have the registry. This was the point, and we should now use it as much as we can.
Thank you, and congratulations to Carsten as author and the working group for this. So that happened in core. With this meeting, we wanted to start sort of an experiment on providing pointers to related documents that have been published or are progressing in their advanced stages in other working group. And notably in Lake, shortly after our latest meeting in Brisbane, EDOC was also published as an RFC together with the companion informational RFC with traces and test vectors. So back to core now. We had approved for publication core SID. You may have noticed on the list, depending on your role, quite a high traffic with the RFC editor as the document is in Node 48, it's almost done. Carsten will have more updates later today in the CoreConf slot. And we also got approved for publication Core Oscoredoc with a very long title, and it's also with the RFC editor still in the edit status. Outside of Core, there's a few documents related to what we do here. One in ACE as a proto application profile for distributing key material, now also in Node 48. And 2 documents from CBOR are also with the RFC editor in the edit status, CBOR time tag and the update to the CDDL grammar. As publication requested, nothing in Core, but in other working groups, we have one instance of that proto application profile, KeyGroup.com now in AD evaluation, and the same status is for the CBOR document, ED and literals. And Francesco says, CBOR time tag in Node 48, really almost done. Good. Okay, back to Core. We have 6 documents that completed working group plus calendar in between the status and the publication request to come at some point. One is group plus core, now on version 21. It is under shepherding review, and we recently got more comments from Christian, sort of confirming what happened after version 17 that received the first reviews from him, and now more comments on the latest version 21. And the authors have started to work on those, so we plan an update as soon as possible. The other 2 documents in this same state are from the CoreConf cluster, COMAI 18, completed the working group plus call some time ago. Some more work is required. We expect a second working group plus call happening when we have a new revision. Young Library stayed a bit in the background, expecting for the work on SID and COMAI to be completed, and will follow up right after those. And Carsten has some more info in his slot soon. On the group combis document, we are mostly waiting for comments from Carsten as a follow-up from his original working group plus code review, and we have recently got more comments on the latest version from Christian, and authors have also started to work on addressing those, and will prepare a revision of the document based on these latest comments. Then we also got a new submission for conditional attributes that Bill will present later today. The main point was addressing comments received during the working group plus call. And then we have href that completed the first working group plus call that Carsten is progressing, and will present the status in the slot in the agenda later today. And looking at other working groups, there's yet another document in ACE related to group communication with OSCORE, more on an admin interface, the OSCORE Group Manager, that also recently completed a working group plus call there. Back to Core. There's been a few working group documents updated recently, but not in the agenda for today. So you're encouraged to have a look at those and comment. Other individual submissions have been updated recently, and 3 of those, as you can see, are in the agenda from today. One in the DNS-related bundle, and 2 from Carlos. And there's also a brand new submitted individual document that is also part of the DNS bundle that Martin will present. And more other documents from other working groups. Yeah, more from ACE related on proto or concrete application and transfer profiles for group communication. And one document in SCHC that is going to obsolete the current RFC that describes how to use SCHC for compressing co-op headers. And that was it for the update on the document status. I leave the floor to Carsten for the next 2 slides.
Thank you. So one document Marco just mentioned was the corrections and clarifications document, or clarifications and corrections. I never can remember which sequence we were using. CLAR for short. And the idea here is to capture things that usually aren't captured, are captured in a very hard to use form in some errata reports and rejections of errata reports. So just having a working document of the working group where we can collect knowledge that we find is useful to actually make use of the protocols we standardize here. That's the idea. This document is supported by a GitHub repository that I think has 29 issues at this point in time. These are not really all issues in the sense that the document may need to be changed. They are really discussion topics. So at the specific issues, we try to get some GitHub discussion going and sometimes also mailing list discussion, where we try to nail down what we know about those topics and what maybe has to be written up, either because it's not done correctly in the document, which might be an errata report as well, or it may be done correctly, but really hard to find. If you have to piece together 5 documents to actually find out how something is done, that is not very implementer friendly. So during the discussion of these topics, we try to agree what would be the best way to handle this topic. Is it just adding a section to the underlying internet draft and use that to record the discussion, or is it actually doing something in a different document, submitting an errata report that maybe then points back to this document and so on. So this document has been around for a long time. I think I started it in 2018. And we didn't really make a lot of progress. And now we have decided we really want to get some rhythm in there, some regular pace. And we want to complete on the order of at least one issue per interim meeting. So we usually will have like 5 issues that are in our focus at any one point. And we're trying to move them forward, and we're going to try to complete at least one per interim meeting. So for instance, we had a recent discussion about the context in which a match might be done between a request and a response. So COAP has some text about this being limited to a DTLS epoch, but it never said, of course, what the rules are for OSCOR. And collecting this information together and maybe collecting things we can do now that DTLS is also available as 1.3. That's the purpose of this issue number 9 and the pull request that we have sitting there. Another example, this time for something which is well defined, but maybe not easy to find out, is the handling of trailing slashes. You know that HTTP has something special there, and we copied this specialty. And yes, you can read section 6 of RFC 7252 and find out how this works, but you really have to do some work. So we have one pull request that is already accepted in the document 32, and one that is still being discussed. I hope it will be ready soon. So this is the kind of discussion. I just wanted to take 2 examples here. And what I'm asking everyone in this room is to actually think about questions, issues, topics where they have issues or where they ran into other people that needed explanation before they could handle a particular topic well. So please think about maybe contributing issues, reviewing the PRs that are in the repository, and once we have merged the PR, of course, also reviewing the internet draft itself. So that's really something useful you can do. Those 30 issues may be intimidating, but you don't have to do all of them at the same time. So pick one that actually resonates with you and write something into the issue or review a PR and add something to the discussion there. Okay, speaking about reviews, I have another slide here, because I was really interested to see what are we doing in the way of reviews. And I think this is really important because it's essentially a unique selling proposition of the IETF that our documents get good reviews. So other SDOs work on secret documents until they are published, or at least make it really hard to access those documents. And of course, that shows in the quality of review they get. And we can be better, and we should be better. So there is one set of reviews, which is the process reviews. So we have some reviews that are kind of baked into the process. We have a Shepherd review and/or working group chair review. We have an AD review once we have submitted something to the ISG. We have the other ISG ADs doing something. We have directorate reviews. So I think we are pretty safe on that side. And for example, if you look at the story of Oscar ad hoc, which is now in the RFC editor queue, it's an approved document that got all those reviews, and that got better with those reviews. What we also have, but maybe not yet enough, is spontaneous reviews of documents under construction in the working group. So Christian clearly is the leader here. So I found 4 reviews from him that went to the mailing list. I probably missed some additional reviews that were in some GitHub issues or pull requests. So Christian is pretty good at this, and Marco also does his share. Okay, Christian just qualifies this. Half of them were Shepherd reviews, but still it's pretty impressive if you look at the record there. And yeah, of course, being a Shepherd, having some other role like a working group chair also motivates you. But what I'm really trying to get a little bit more here is reviews just by working group members that see the documents and have questions, need clarifications, don't think that a solution is exactly the one we should be using. Please send in a review. It never has to be a full review. If you just say, look at section 5 and have this problem, wonderful. That helps us. We also have cross-working group reviews. So, for instance, Brian Ziepers from the DTN crowd said something about the bundle protocol draft, or Alex Feng, who's working on notifications in Yang, sent some comments on Komai. And of course, we can do the inverse. We can also look at other drafts and send reviews there. And of course, you can always put this in the form of GitHub feedback. So you can over a GitHub issue or send a broader review in as a GitHub review if you're more comfortable with that. So decisions on those will happen on the mailing list in the end, but starting getting the ball rolling can be done in a number of ways. So that was my appeal. And of course, in the various slots, we will ask about who will be reviewing this. So I think we will come back to this. Marco.
Thank you, Carsten. Of course, I concur. Please review. The last slide we have, this is a summary of the already planned next series of interim meeting. We plan to start after the summer break at the end of August, all the way until IETF 121. And as mentioned before, a recurring topic is expected to be the hands-on work on CoreClar, issue-driven mostly. Okay, that said, we finished the introduction a few minutes late, so let's try to catch up with the time. And the next in line is Carsten with the CoreCon cluster. And that's a single slide set, yeah. And I can give you control.
Thank you. So you have seen essentially this slide quite a few times, but it's moving forward. So the first element of CoreConf of using Yang in constrained environments. That was published about 2 years ago. So it has already had some time to be implemented and looked at by people, and we don't really have problems with it so far. What we actually worked on a lot in the last couple of months was the next document, the SID document, which governs the allocation of numbers from a linear space, which is kind of an innovation in Yang SIBO. So this is almost done. We have a document that passed the first working group last call, but has enough changes now that we probably will do another one. Excuse me. And we have one document that we will not be talking about today, and that will probably need a little bit of reworking after the changes we agree on COMAI. So I will focus on COMAI today, but let's just quickly say something about the other documents. So as I said, 9254 is 2 years old, or went 2 years old a week ago. Stable, no known problems. There are two documents that try to extend this. One is the Yang stand-in document that provides an efficient binary representation of data types that are text-based in Yang. Yang is essentially XML at its heart. So everything is text-based there, and that's of course bad if you need to manage many IP addresses or other data that have efficient binary forms. So this document is technically complete, but not editorially great. So you can go ahead and implement it. But we have to discuss things like how do you actually negotiate their use, but really please go ahead and implement it and see what happens when you do this. The other document is just a proposal how to handle Yang metadata, apart from 7950, which defines XML, and 7951, which defines Yang on JSON. We have an additional document defining something called Yang metadata. We didn't have a SIBO Yang representation for that yet, but we have a proposal now. Laurent?
Yes, is there something for egg string that you have in Yang that represent an hexadecimal string? Because right now it's still converted in a string instead of a byte array. So maybe it's good if we have IP addresses to have something similar for egg string.
Right, that's a pretty good comment. What this document that is there at the moment did was leverage existing tags. I don't think we have a tag that would work extremely well for hex strings, but tag, what is it, 23? Might work for that, or we might want to define a new tag to better serve Yang. But that's an excellent suggestion. Okay, so this is work going on, but right now we don't have any big decisions to make. We just have to complete those documents, and then at some point maybe we'll do adoption. And we will probably do adoption in the SIBO working group, because these are really more SIBO issues and not issues about using CoAP to do management access. The second document called SID, I just said, we just are almost done. The document has been approved half a year ago, and we finally got almost out of Auth 48. Now I just answered the last question today, I hope. And what we now need to do is get a designated expert. And we have a mailing list now for coordinating the designated expert team, the RFC editor, RFC production center, IANA, and possibly others who want to make sure that this space works right. So this is really about setting up the process, making sure that the documents are handled properly and so on. So please join that mailing list if you are interested in making this process happen. Okay, COMAI. COMAI is one of the three conf protocols, netconf, restconf, you may know. Callconf is just Yang Siba over CoAP, and of course uses the other two we already had. Right now there is not that much happening because we were focusing on Core SID, but we had some really interesting implementation discussions at the Think2Think Research Group interims in May and in June. So maybe it's worth looking at the notes we have from those meetings. And what we probably want to do is look at more opportunities for simplifying this. So maybe using SID0 instead of GET and so on. There was one question whether we could have multiple RPCs or actions in one payload. That would be new thinking. We should think about whether this is good, and if yes, what semantics it has. And we probably want some more examples. So one thing that will come up is, or already is being discussed, is the scaling issue. Now, Komai was designed for constrained devices for small management bases. So when we are thinking about scaling, we are thinking about scaling down. But still, the amount of management information that is available may be large. So if every node in a 6-law network has a neighbor table and we want to retrieve some information from that, the whole neighbor table may be a bit large to get. But right now we can only select subtrees. We have no other selection except some limited things that don't really solve the problem. So the question was, do we need more selective retrieval? So one thing that came up was a depth limit, but this is a very blunt instrument. There also was a requirement for projection. So if some leaf or not leaf, some container has multiple components in there, maybe you are only interested in one of them. You want to know what is the retransmission rate. You don't want to know all the other things that may be of interest. So there is a parallel discussion in the Yang scaling, under the term Yang scaling, which is about scaling up, but which has all exactly the same issues. So the overall plan for Komai is to get those remaining comments addressed, probably do another working group plus call and maybe add a few more examples. That examples are always good, but they also have to be made. But maybe leave this scaling discussion to an extension. So we should generate a proof of concept how to do scaling, just to make sure we have all the extension points in place to do this. But maybe work on a second document that provides more ways of scaling. And an obvious extension point here, of course, is query parameters for the fetch operation. But maybe we can find other extension points as well. So that would be my proposal. Questions? Alex.
Yeah, hello. So I already raised a question on the mailing list about how CBOR it's kind of different encoded. So I am talking about the notifications. So there is a big project around here at the IETF about integrating Yang into the Kafka environment so that the messages can be validated. And I think this project also can be useful for this sort of big data collection, basically. So I would suggest to maybe replace or even just reference that draft so that basically we have one type of notifications structure for netconf, restconf, and coreconf rather than everyone having their sort of notifications. And I think that that could be useful for developers to just integrating Yang into other environments. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, maybe we should add that the underlying problem is that when netconf was designed, there was no Yang. So when the netconf protocol was defined, they didn't use the ability of Yang to possibly specify the protocol information beyond the actual data. And then when RESTconf was done, this was moved back partially to the Yang domain, but not really. And I'm very much in favor of coming up with a common solution here, but I'm not sure that we actually are there enough to get this done without delaying Komae even further. So that's maybe a discussion we should be having. Thomas, you probably have an idea about that. So even if we don't have time, I can give some time from the href slides. Next.
Thomas here. Just maybe one quick note. If you look at the netconf charter, you will find out that actually the netconf working group wants to obsolete 5277, that structure. As you said, 5277 was basically designated for netconf, and we are currently have a discussion in the working group, and also a draft which we are proposing to define a Yang module and basically replacing what the notification structure is on 5277.
Yeah, so I think what we should make sure at this point in time is that we can adopt this as soon as it solidifies. I'm not sure if this is a reason to actually throw out the existing notification mechanism from the document. I think we should discuss this on the list.
Absolutely.
So we really should make sure that we can adopt this work once it's ready.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Just a remark, Carsten, can you cut your mic when there is question because it generates echo in the room?
That's interesting. Didn't do that yesterday. Good. If there are no other questions about CoreConf, then I would like to go to the next slot, which is in the same slide set, the CRIs. When we started CoreApp, we decided we were going to use URIs as they are being used for HTTP. And that has served us well, but sometimes it's better to actually circumvent the incredible complexity that has accreted on URIs. So we decided to do something called a concise resource identifier, which is like a URI, but not text-based, but it actually exposes its semantic structure. And this has been worked on for a while. It was originally started by Klaus Hartke and has been reviewed and revised a lot. We currently have -16 out, submitted today actually, which picks up an IANA early review, pointing out that the CRI scheme registry that we're defining here does not negatively impact the UI scheme registry, and some other editorial stuff. So that's where we are. We are almost done, I'd say. There is one issue that we could work on, or that we could say it's not that important for us. Are CRIs deterministic? And the first knee-jerk response is for absolute CRIs, yes. For relative CRIs, CRI references, no. And what this means is that if you put in a URI into the conversion process, you get the same CRI. So if you put two equivalent URIs, you get the same CRI. And I think we're almost there, but we have to find out whether we can actually state that as a property or that's just an aspirational goal. And of course, the inverse direction, no two different CRIs should produce the same URI. We should restrict the CRI space enough that one URI actually has a CRI that matches it. So really the matter of equivalence is important here. And equivalence of URIs are a hot topic in the general UI world. we should find out whether we actually can prove some properties here if we actually want to pick this up. So I think that is a discussion that we should dedicate an interim for. So where are we? This is ongoing work, and I think the real work that happens in the background is getting more test vectors. And right now we have a way to actually edit them in CSV, which is a bit faster than generating them in JSON form. One thing that came up was having test vectors for zone identifiers, which are another hotly contested issue in the URI space, and I'm not sure how much damage you will take from supporting these. So that's definitely one that we need to discuss beyond the test vectors, but until we have test vectors, we cannot really discuss that. So the plan is to complete this ID with a few open questions that we still have after the summer break. Questions about that?
Yeah, hearing no questions, then thanks a lot, Karsten, for the update. And the next in line would be Bill, conditional attributes. So let me take the slide for you and give you control, which you should have now.
Okay, thanks. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Bill.
Okay, good. All right, good morning and good evening for those people who are in Europe. Just a very quick update on the conditional attributes draft, which has gone through enough reviews now. Well, there's never enough reviews, but anyway, gone through sufficient reviews now that it's in working group last call, and it also received an early review from the IoT Directorate. Next slide, please.
Oh, you have control for the slides.
Oh, I do.
If you have the app with you, otherwise I can take it back.
Great.
And try them for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay, I'm gonna try this. Does it?
I don't know if you have to plug something. It's maybe on your app. Yeah, that's sorry.
Yeah, you're supposed to use your app.
Application. Yeah.
I'm not signed into my app. Is there any way that you can control the slides for me?
Sure, I can drive for you. There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so thank you, Marco. So now the current version is version 0.07, which was uploaded just at the cutoff date of this IETF meeting. And but after that, I received one review from Marco. Thank you again, Marco. And I'll be updating the draft to address this review. The early review from the IoT Directorate was given for version 6, and I think almost all the review comments have been addressed in this version. Normally, what I do is I outline all the different points as GitHub issues, and then I start closing the issues one by one. So I think perhaps all of them except one have been closed now. But there are some things I would like to discuss with the reviewer, who is Ines, and she's on her vacation. So we had a quick discussion by email today, and we'll resolve that for 08, probably in August when she returns from her summer break. And then there was some feedback from Iana to clarify the registration procedures for the conditional attributes registry. Next slide. So these next few slides are about the differences between 06 and 07. The intended status of the draft has been changed. So it went from informational to standards based on comments from the IoT Directorate and also from some mailing list messages. And then we had some discussions in Yokohama about this. So this is now in standards track. Next slide, please. And then there is some text that was basically already there in the editor's version, but hadn't been shifted to the 07. This was also previously already discussed about the fact that conditional attributes should not interfere with observe, the way observe works. So we introduced resource state projections. and that clarified how this draft works. Okay, next slide. This is an example. So on the left, you see a simple observe relationship between a client and a server. And on the right, you see how the server behaves when it receives an observe with a conditional attribute. So essentially, instead of the server sort of using the same resource representation, it creates a new state projections. And then whenever there are updates to the state projection, then it's returned to the clients. So next slide, please. Then the other part was about how to cancel registrations when you have observed attributes. So now we have the resolution here, which is to do exactly what 7641 says. So then if you do a cancel through the client, then you must include the conditional attributes. Next slide. Security considerations have been updated based on issues raised in the mailing list, particularly for amplification attacks, and then also for resource exhaustion if you use EPMAX. Okay, next slide. So this is one remaining issue that was raised in the review from the IoT Directorate, basically about how multiple conditional attributes will be handled. So obviously, we know from RFC 3986 that query parameters are given an URI with an AND relationship, but the question was asked whether there can be multiple conditional attributes with all relationships, and that's actually a very valid point. Obviously, I don't want to override how the generic URI syntax is written. So my recommendation was to say that if you want to have an OR relationship, then you should really register several registrations independently. And then each registration contains different conditional attributes. And I think that's a very clean way of doing this. So if there are no objections, this will go into at least the resolution of this issue, but I'm not sure whether this should be explicitly stated in the document. So if anybody has any comments on that, I'll be very happy to hear it now. Can't really see the queue, sorry. Oh, Carsten is in the queue now.
Yeah, just one obvious observation. If you have an OR relationship between two registrations that actually overlap, then you get two copies, which is maybe not exactly what you want. But whether that's important in practice, I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And then especially if you do have a combination of both and or conditional attributes, then it gets really messy if you want to put this all in the one registration. So I'm going to have to look on that. Okay, thank you. So next slide. I think this might be coming to the end.
We also have Christian in the queue.
Christian briefly appeared.
Yeah, Christian, just a quick comment. Of course, if that query language just becomes too complex, there's always the option of further documents specifying more complex query structures in a fetch payload.
Okay,
that's always an option, and that can be done later if the need for all relations persists.
All right, thanks, Christian. Okay, if there are no other comments, we can move on to the next slide, which is thank you. Okay, I've got 3 minutes to spare, and any other comments or questions at this stage? Marco?
Well, thank you, Bill. So I guess the plan is just to produce a revision addressing those final things, and let me know if you want to discuss more on the comments I gave you, but hopefully the next version should be ready to go to be polished for a Shepherd review. We have a Shepherd appointed already, by the way.
Yes, we do. Yeah, and apologies for the delay in getting this out. So I'm back on my research track, so that shouldn't take as much time as it took between 06 and 07. Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions, looking forward to version 8.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the next in line is Martin with the works on the NS over co-op. 1 second, and I can give you control. Use the share. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hello, I'm Martin. I'd like to talk about DNS over co-op, but also 3 other drafts that are related to that now. So in general, I'd want to talk about the service binding records with DNS, and that includes DNS over co-op, the DNR draft, co-op, DTLS service B, and transport indication. Transport indication is something that Christian will talk a little bit more about later, but this is also related to that. So the original idea was to allow for discovery of doc resolvers via DNS, DHCP, and root advertisements. And for that, there exists already a solution with service binding records or the service params field for DHCP and router advertisements. The problem is, however, that de facto only discovery of co-op over DTLS was specified via the LPN ID in RC 8323. And for co-op over DTLS, we just need its own ALPN ID. So we allocated the co-ID, but the experts asked us to put this somewhere in a draft. So what's missing still is what about different co-op transport protocols, and what about OSCOR and ad hoc, and also there's a path for DNS over co-op needed. And so in the May interim, we tried to create a minimum doc service bundle. The path for the DNS over co-op is specified now in a doc pass key in the DNS over co-op draft. The value itself is defined as a CBOS sequence of text strings, and the text representation is then in CBOS diagnostic notation. There was a question about this, if this is maybe conflicting with, for example, zone files, but we think we put this out of the way. So if you have any idea about zone files and see a problem there, please speak up. Then there is this DTLS service speed record draft. This basically just defines the ALPN ID for co-op over DTLS. Then we have the DNR draft, which basically is just now a problem statement for service params for OSCOR, and all the transport stuff beyond DTLS and TLS goes into the transport indication draft now. And this is basically how the situation now looks like. We have a lot of cross-referencing of documents, which in the May interim we already were pointed out is a bit of a mess. But we were able to basically reduce the normative references between the documents, except for the already published RFCs, to just 1. And that's from the DNS over co-op draft to the service B DTLS draft, which basically just specifies this co-op over DTLS and TLS connection. And this is basically our minimal doc service parameter bundle, which basically is our battery included package, where now DDR and DNR is at least possible over TLS and for TLS and DTLS, and everything beyond is then ongoing work for the rest of the year. So our question is doc with this DTLS ALPN ID now ready for working group last call?
Carsten?
Yeah, Carsten?
I have one question. You mentioned using CBOR diagnostic notation in a live protocol used for interchange.
In the root, in the zone files for DNS, for example. So if you need any text representation of the doc parse,
Okay,
then it's in CBOR diagnostic notation. And the problem with the zone file syntax was we were wondering if the commas in the CBOR diagnostic notation might cause a problem. But as far as we saw, it doesn't.
yeah, I'm just a bit worried by elevating CBOR diagnostic notation into a live part of a protocol, part of a live protocol. So let me just say this, and we maybe don't need to discuss it, but Christian can discuss it.
As far as I understand, that text representation of zone files is just as much a diagnostic and configuration format as EDN is. So this is basically a syntax that is internal to the DNS servers and their config files, and is just what they use to store it. It looks very similar between the different DNS implementations, but I don't think it's completely interoperable. But I might be wrong here.
Yeah, I think operationally these files are used in a lot of places. So I wouldn't say, even if it's not officially part of the protocol, and it might even be, I don't know how zone transfers actually work these days. We should make sure that we are not putting something in here that is not designed to be used for interchange.
I mean, it's basically just about representing the CBOR sequence somehow in a format that is textual represented. Since it's a parse, it could also, of course, be just a parse with slashes instead of commas. But maybe this could also lead to some confusion, that people then start putting the text path into the LPN record. So yeah, it's a little bit of a discussion point, I would say here. But
So
I mean, just to clarify, it isn't really sending CBOR diagnostic format like there's a file that is in CBOR diagnostic format over the medium. It's just so that you have a text representation for the CBOR sequence. You can call it CBOR diagnostic format, but you can also just call it a comma separated list. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's that critical as you think.
Okay, I hope there's an example somewhere I can look at and make up my mind on this. Thank you.
Any further questions? Marco.
This is Marco. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up more on the procedural side. So I also wanted to stress that I found the relation between the different documents in the bundle sound. I was involved in that interim meeting where that was discussed, and the result was also brought up on the mailing list to double check with the group, and no objections were raised. So hopefully the plan and the relations within the document is clear now. And we have a point from Francesca, of course, in the chat. It'd be better to first ensure that the new document that is still an individual submission is adopted as a working group document before issuing the working group last call on DOC. Do you expect any update on this version 0, or from your point of view, it does what it should in a good enough way to be considered for an adoption call?
Well, if there's no, I know that's not an. No,
SVCB.
I don't expect an update for that. There is for the DOC draft. Again, about the diagnostic format, there might be some discussion. And there was also a YANA review, but that was basically just a wording issue. So that's why I didn't mention it here. But I will add an update for that.
Okay, so SVCB is stable enough to consider.
Yeah.
Carsten, I think we can consider adopting it sooner than later. What do you think?
Of course, I was just distracted. I'm sorry.
No worries. Let me just do a quick show of hands. Yeah. Who is in favor of adopting draft lenders core co-op details SVCB as a working group document? Let's give it 15 seconds or so. And it's a 5-page document.
And we can still fix it. I mean, this is just
of course.
It's not a working group last call.
Okay. Something has moved, so let's say 5 seconds more. Okay, looks good enough. And the result is 13 yes, 0 no, 4 no opinion. So the chairs will issue a working group adoption call on the SVCB document see what happens. And after that, hopefully the working group plus call on DOC can follow.
Okay.
Thank you, Martin. Any more questions? Anyone? Okay. Thanks a lot for the update then.
Yeah, thank you.
And the next one is Christian. So let's see if I can take the slides again and give them to you. Off you go.
I have slide control, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Christian Amses, and transport indication is something that has been brewing in this group for quite some time, and Martin kindly joined me on the work here because a lot of what is recently happening there is related to the SVCP topic that she's just presented. I won't go into the history of the document this time. You basically know what it is about, just showing the summary here. There are two changes in the latest version, one quick and easy, and one is more complex, so that I would like to have feedback on that. The quick and easy one was that last time we talked about this, there was the open question of whether the relation between some resource and the proxy available for it should go through the hosts relationship or through the same origin concept. There wasn't much feedback there, so I think either is good, and I picked the easier one, which has simplified the document a lot. The larger topic is SVCP properties, parameters. And when we're starting to talk about that, I'd like to emphasize that nothing about this changes the fundamental concept that we are still treating transports as proxies, so that when a request is sent to a different address than would trivially be resolved, then we'll still treat that other address as a proxy for the origin resource. So let's start briefly with what we already have in a specified way. We have two things that can be interchanged. That is, we kind of a URI with its. Ich bin gleich wieder bei dir, Fabian. We have a URI which indicates a scheme, and we have a message that is sent, that is prepared on a particular co-op transport to be sent to a particular address, and that has all those header and options parameters in there. And the way we currently get from a URI, which encodes not all of the information needed to send the co-op message to the full co-op message, is we use the system's name resolution mechanism, which in many cases would result in a quad A lookup. And that only works if, and that requires that, sorry. Fabian, kann du mal kurz Pause geben? Danke. That requires that the scheme encodes everything that we need to know in order to pick the right transport, provided that there are different transports in the first place for something that can result in a quad A record when looked at. Now there are added requirements from the DNS discovery, and there are two ways that those so there are two ways new data can come in. That can be via discovery from DNS, and that can be via local discovery. And in both cases, what we receive is service binding data. That means that we have a particular service in the DDR and DNR cases that's always implicitly _DNS. We have a name for which this is of the service. We have service parameters, which typically contain an ELPN and can then contain the doc path and all those other things. And then we can get additional DNS data in there. For example, as part of doing that service binding lookup, we can receive the quad A record. And all this data can be used to create a co-op request message, which DOC with the discovery requires to have and thus specifies. So now how is this related to transport indication? DOC is the first document that needs this for co-op. And given the timelines and dependencies, spells out how this conversion from the SVCP record to the co-op message and thus implicitly to the URI that is being requested, can be done. But this is something that I would rather not have restated in every other document for another service. So transport indication now contains a generalization of this. And it fits in the topic because the same information, the same kind of information that we can get through the proxy advertisements that have been in transport indication so far, this is the same kind of information. So it also tells us that in order to satisfy a request for that particular URI, you use these and those and those and those transport details. Now that so far so good, and I think that is what has been the outcome of the interim. There is another way of using this that has so far only been discussed in an appendix and in the latest version been moved into a dedicated section. That is, we could do the same thing that HTTP does for discovery. And when we have a name, perform an SVCP lookup in DNS or some whatever equivalent is to the name resolution of the particular system that is being used. Send that request to the resolution service, receive that whole bundle of service binding data, which contains more than just more information than just the quad A record, and compose the co-op message of that. This is something that HTTP has started doing without any large compatibility issues. Still, with what has been discussed so far for co-op, I have not described this as a change of how resolution happens, but just something that applications can opt into. So this is just an additional mechanism that I think is useful to describe. And yeah, before I go into the questions, there's one more detail I'd like to add there. That is, so far this has covered the network address and port, and possibly the co-op transport, which with this mechanism can be indicated in the result, what it could not be indicated with the plain quad A record. But this could also provide additional data relevant to the setup of the security context. So in particular, if there is a TLSA record associated with the result, that could go into the creation of the co-op message and cannot be trivially expressed in the co-op URI. Something similar is described in the document now for ad hoc, but I won't go into those details. If you want to know those, read the document. And it's not relevant to the questions which I would like to ask, which is, is this whole approach of just saying that applications can opt into it, but otherwise we're still sticking with the same, with what we've been doing, too cautious? Or can we just do what HTTP is doing and say that, like, if you can do it, query it. If there's an SVCP resource record, use it. Your experience might be better with it. And if your application describes that this is the one way you do it, you can still start leaving out the quad A records directly. So that's the first question. The next question is, how precisely do we phrase that service binding request? Do we want to register a dedicated resource record for that? Or do we just stick with a more generic mechanism of having underscore co-op and query the SVCP resource record for that? And third question is, do we want to have a dedicated underscore co-op S as well? Or do we stick with a single underscore co-op, because the mechanism of how you verify what kind of co-op S tells you to use DTLS, but co-op S doesn't really tell you how to verify your peer. So maybe it's better to stick with a single one, with a single scheme, rather than still keeping two schemes popular at the same time. Yeah, that's it from my side. So on the larger scale, please review this. Please also have a look at the section that describes service binding parameters in your ILITERATs, which I'm not sure whether we really need in this document, or whether I think it's a good idea to have them, but I'd like to hear more opinions there. And we haven't had any interrupt testing yet. The other question is, like, who would like to join in there, and which parts of it would you like to test? Thank you. I hope we have more than 30 seconds for questions, but let's see.
Marco here. So first of all, I can review, definitely, and I gave a first look at the document already. I had a question on the use of has unique proxy as a target attribute and the way to build on it for possibly omitting a URI host, which seems useful in the interest of overhead. I just wonder if that introduces fundamentally deviation from the algorithm in the co-op RFC for producing a set of options from a URI, and if that warrants considering an update track or whatever.
This does not constitute a change of that mechanism because you're sending it to a different resource. You're going through a proxy, and the URI you're describing is still the same, but you build because you're sending it to every time you're sending something to a proxy. This might change the options that are going in, but that doesn't change the eventual URI. Of course, if someone takes the co-op message and then goes back this circular arrow and builds the URI from it, they better know that there is this proxying involved and that there is some kind of implicit aliasing going on. But that conversion direction would only happen in the server, and the server has advertised this and knows that it's kind of, they're all the same.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions for Christian? Heard, reading none. Thank you for the update then. Thanks. And I think I'm the next in line. Okay, so hello again. This is an update on the Observe Multicast Notification document, now version 9. And to give a recap, how does Observe normally work with co-op? In the particular case where you have multiple clients all interested in observing the same resource at the same server, where they would subscribe or register for the observation individually, and as a follow-up, the server would reply to each of those individually with notifications over unicast as the resource representation changes. So what this document introduces is a more efficient way to handle the case where the server in question would start at itself a group observation with a cosmetic phantom observation request. Then it provides instructions to all the clients interested in that same resource so that all those clients can listen to a multicast address, and when the resource representation changes, the server in question can send a single notification over multicast to all the clients. And it is, of course, possible to enforce also end-to-end security, protecting the multicast notifications using the GroupoScore security protocol. So it's been a while since the last presentation, but we have updated regularly these documents in different respects, from clarifications to relatively minor protocol behavior, and more recently with the switching to the use of CRIs from the href document presented by Karsten earlier during the meeting for the sake of giving instructions to the client about how to listen to the multicast notifications. But starting with clarifications, it has been true for a while that clients may learn the instructions they need to know to receive the multicast notifications also by alternative means than the error response typically distributed by the server in that respect. For example, they can fetch a previously publicly made available phantom observation request from the server. In that case, clients can just set everything up on their side and start listening to the multicast notification, but it can still be useful, like in the original case, to approach the server in any case to help the server with the process of roughly counting the number of clients still around. And on the topic of the rough counting, we have added quite a lot of text on consideration and discussions about the accuracy and the reliability of this rough counting process at the server, how that changes in that respect in different setups. So with or without proxy, with the use of end-to-end security or not, with the use of end-to-end security, particularly with OSCOR-protected deterministic requests as defined in Christian's document for cacheable OSCOR. There were also a number of clarifications on the detailed semantics of the option introduced for the rough counting, and on even earlier mentioning that the instruction that the server provides to the client is really not supposed to instruct any redirection. More on clarification, we removed some text that could have been confusing. There was nothing to add on the replay check of notifications at clients. It's just supposed to work like the Grupo score document defines. We have better expressed how proxies, if deployed, consume the proxy-related options that can be included in messages to forward. We have had for a while two appendices describing, for one, in Appendix C, the case where the server is also self-managing the OSCORE group used to protect with Grupo score the multicast notifications. And in that case, some parameters are really not needed for this particular application, and we explain why and why they can be omitted. We have another appendix also around for a while on the particular case where Grupo score is used with OSCORE protected deterministic requests used as phantom requests, and there was a lot of text repeated in multiple places. So we collapsed all those sentences into a few paragraphs, and we brought them up to be mentioned as quick and as soon as possible. And there was also some realignment of parameter naming, mostly with the Grupo score document. But with respect to protocol behavior, it was also discussed in previous IETF meetings, and now it's in the draft that if, like I mentioned before, the server decides to make publicly available a phantom observation request and the instructions to join a group observation to be fetched by other means by the clients, well, the server can do that, but it really has to have started a group observation first as a first thing. And in the appendix on the self-managed of OSCORE group at the server, we introduced one more parameter describing how the group works, or at least the current residual lifetime for that group and its key material with the parameter XE, and that was inspired by similar related changes in ACE documents, actually. And regarding Appendix D, this was also discussed and confirmed at the previous IETF meeting. If we go for the particular setup where Grupo score is used with deterministic phantom observation request, well, that's going to be the case, but in parallel, the server will not start a parallel twin group observation not based on deterministic request. So no twin group observations. We gave some more details on how the proxy behaves during the rough counting process, again, in the interest of the server, counting the number of clients roughly still around. And now we're also mentioning the newly defined proxy-related options, proxy CRI and proxy skin number from the href document. But the major update, I would say, is a revision of the field TP info in the error informative response that the server sends to clients as they approach to tell them how they should align and set up to listen to multicast notifications. And we used to indicate transport-specific information there with a sort of custom encoding. And finally, we switched to using CRIs instead. That was started by Christian long ago in PR13. CRIs matured enough to finally make it. And now we recently we created PR number 14, superseded the previous one, and now merged in the document. So it's really about that TP info field in the error response, and you can see the new and latest situation on the right. It's composed simply of two fields. TPI server is a CRI with no local part, giving transport-related information on the server. And then TPI details is a set of additional information that depends on basically the URI scheme and the transport over which co-op is delivered that is indicated in TPI server. And to have a concrete idea of what this can mean, we have, of course, a whole section in the draft, also summarized here on the right as an example of what you have if you specifically co-op over UDP over multicast, which is the typical case now. So again, TPI server is a CRI with information related to the server and practically the source address of the multicast notifications. While TPI details UDP here is composed of two pieces of information, TPI client as another CRI practically indicating the destination multicast address for the multicast notification that the clients have to listen to, and TPI token with the value of the co-op token used in all the multicast notifications sent for a certain group observation as all bound by token value to the phantom observation request. And finally, we extended a bit the security considerations, again, around the topic of the rough counting of clients. And we had to revise all the examples, not only aesthetically, to use ASVG, for example, but also to be aligned with the switching to using CRIs that I mentioned. In the IANA considerations, other than minor revisions, we also registered a target attribute that we discussed in the past, GPOBS, and it's a hint like OBS, but intended to signal the support for group observations at the server. And we revised the structure of the previously defined transport protocol indication to be aligned with the new structure intended for the TP info parameter in the error response from the server and the use of CRIs therein. This is an outlook on next steps. There's a few issues on the GitHub to take, especially describe with a good example at least how this is supposed to work in the presence of a reverse proxy, and some advanced details. For example, if clients want to target multiple servers and once, each of which can use the method defined in this document, and possible revocation from the server side of early advertised phantom observation request. I'd like to spend some time also defining how SCHC is supposed to compress the two newly introduced options, but that should be pretty simple. And related to what we also said at the beginning of the meeting, please do provide comments and reviews. We got some very useful comments a few versions ago from Joran and Jaime, now integrated in the document. Please do provide more. Thank you very much. Karsten.
I have a question that you don't have to answer now. Please, everybody think about it and answer to the list. Do you care about deterministic CRIs? End of question.
Something to think about, also following up on the main thread in href. Thanks. Any more questions? Okay, thanks a lot. Then the next in line is Richard, and I can open the slides and give control.
Right.
1 second. Now you should have control.
Yes, indeed, I have control. Let me share my video also. Right, yes, so hello everyone. I want to present some updates on this draft OSCOR capable proxies, which is now reached its second version. So just a recap what this is about. Well, it's an update to the OSCOR RFC 8613, and we're defining here the use of OS core in a communication leg, including a proxy. So this means that you can have OS core between an origin client or server and a proxy, but also you can have OS core between two proxies in a chain of proxies. So practically this means that we're allowing the fact that an intermediary such a proxy can be an actual OS core endpoint, which was not covered at all in the OSCOR RFC. There you could only have origin client and origin server be OSCOR endpoints, but now we're also allowing proxies to be OSCOR endpoints. So concretely, it contains a number of things, but among them rules on how you now process the co-op options, because OS core classifies co-op options into classes that indicate whether it should be encrypted or not. And basically, this rule set that we've defined now is you take a particular co-op option, how do you decide whether you should encrypt it or not? And our idea here is to try to escalate and encrypt as many options as possible, because in the past you may not have been able to encrypt proxy URI. I mean, if you're communicating through a proxy, because well, the proxy needs to see it. But if the proxy itself can understand OSCOR, well, of course, the client could protect that option in the layer between the client and the proxy. So we also admit, of course, then explicitly that you can have nested OSCOR protection. So it's not just about one layer of OSCOR protection. You can have multiple layers, and we call this OSCOR in OSCOR. And for example, you can first protect end-to-end between your client and server, and then you protect that further between the client and proxy. So you actually have 2 layers. And typically we get 2 layers, one end-to-end and one to the next hop. But it's possible to have more. And the focus here is on OSCORE, but the same holds true also for Group OSCORE. So what updates have we done for version 2? Well, it was submitted now before the cutoff, done a number of editorial things in terms of clarifications, updated references, and some readability improvements. One bit bigger thing we did is we clarified the order of OSCORE protections for outgoing requests. So what we had already was saying that as a source endpoint X, you first use the security context shared with the destination application endpoint Y. So you first do the end-to-end encryption or protection. But we now are a bit more explicit on this, and we say that, well, X should apply the OSCORE layer for each proxy with which it shares an OSCORE security context, and it should apply them in the same order as the proxies are deployed and the message is intended to go through. But so practically, this means that if you have a client and a server and a chain of proxies in the middle as a client, well, you first encrypt for the actual endpoint server, but then you start from the proxy closest to your ultimate endpoint, and you encrypt with that proxy's OSCORE security context, and then the next one, until you reach the closest proxy to yourself. Further updates, we revised the escalation of the co-op option protection, of course, keeping the same rationale that whenever it's possible to encrypt an option, of course, maintaining correct functionality, well, then you should encrypt the option. And we also discovered that the previous algorithm we had a bug, which was reported by Christian Amsis, and so thanks a lot to him. And we also had that in an issue, and this has been addressed. So this bug was practically that as a side effect of the rule set we had, the URI host and URI port options were encrypted between client and server. And we thought that was a good thing. However, there's a problem here, which is that if the client is communicating to a reverse proxy, well, first of all, the client will typically not know that it's communicating to a reverse proxy. And now if you do end up encrypting the URI host and URI port options as a client, well, now the recipient of that message, which you may think is a server, but is actually a reverse proxy, well, it cannot decrypt those options, and thus the reverse proxy cannot take forwarding decisions based on, for instance, URI host. So this has been fixed, and the algorithm has been amended to remove this problem. So in this case now, the way the algorithm works is that the URI host and URI port options will be encrypted in only a single case, and that is they come together with the proxy scheme or proxy scheme number options, and the intended consumer of the options is a forward proxy, which the sender endpoint is aware is a forward proxy. Only in that case do encrypt. So that solves this problem with reverse proxies. More updates. We actually revised a lot the section 3.1, again, about the rule set for protecting co-op options. It used to be a set of kind of abstract properties to check, but now it's more written as like a sequence of steps, mirroring the state diagram we have in Appendix B. And the steps also been rephrased to reflect possible presence of reverse proxies, which the sender endpoint may not know about. So overall, it's a more like rule-based, you do this and you do that kind of approach, mirroring again this big figure we have, which I will also show later in a slide. We also simplified the algorithm because we could actually merge different separate cases. We could merge them together into the same case. And of course, then the Appendix B showing this state diagram of the rule set was also updated according to the revised algorithm. And now if I go to the next slide, now you can see this. So this is something we have in Appendix B also as a ASCII art, but this is really the rule set and the decision-making process you go through. You have an outgoing message M starting in the top left corner, and it includes an option OPT. And now how do you take a decision on how to process this option, whether to process it as its original class URI or whether to actually escalate the encryption and process it as class E. And depending on the number of properties on who added the message and what exact options it includes, you end up with either ending up in one of these green or orange circles. And green is that you process it with class E, and orange you process it as its original class U or I. So this is really a figure of this rule set for option processing. Yeah, some more updates. We expanded section 7 about the co-header compression with SHIC, and the presentation there has been improved in terms of what step you should take for an outer or inner SHIC decompression. And we also updated Appendix A with 2 new examples when reverse proxies are used. And of course, these examples are aligned with the latest fixes to the rule set for option encryption. And so we have Appendix A6, where we have OSCORE both between a client and server and also between the client and proxy. It's a typical reverse proxy setup, basically. We also have a bit more advanced use case in Appendix A7, where we have OSCORE actually between client server, client proxy, and also between the proxy and server. And in this case, we try to mirror that the proxy operates as a reverse proxy, similar to the lightweight M2M gateway, where we have a separate section about that also in section 2.4, and it will take forwarding decisions based on the URI path option. And then we had another update with regards to the hop limit option. So the hop limit option is defined in RFC 8768, where basically it's meant to prevent loops when co-op proxies are used. So you set an initial value, and then each proxy will decrement this value by 1. And if you reach 0, you will return an error response, basically not forward anymore. So, well, what did we do here, and what's the problem? Well, the problem is that RFC 8768 does not define the OSCORE class for the hop limit option, and thus by the OSCORE RFC, it should be handled as class E, because that's the default behavior for non-classified options. And well, then you run into this potential problem is that the origin client uses OSCORE with the origin server and will protect this option end-to-end. But then you actually lose the whole point of this option, because the point of the option is that it should be visible to proxies. So you can still, of course, let the proxies add the option, but they will, in such case, ignore the actual intent of the client that put that option, because they cannot read the value of that option. It's been encrypted. And also, it's just extra overhead going through the entire chain. So what have we done in this draft? Well, we now propose an update to RFC 8768 to say that the hop limit option should be defined as class U for OSCORE. And so when using the hop limit option with normal OSCORE, you do not protect the hop limit option end-to-end. And when using the hop limit option with OSCORE, as in this document, well, you will not protect the hop limit option end-to-end. However, you will end up protecting the hop limit option hop by hop. And then we also had a related fix about IANA. Next steps, we want to look at additions of outer options after producing a corresponding encrypted inner option. So basically having both outer and inner options, which sometimes happens, for instance, in the case of observe. We want to handle multiple responses to a SAM request if they are also protected by a proxy. This is also related to core OSCORE group com. Extending security considerations, adding more examples, and yeah, any comments and reviews are very welcome.
Yeah, there was a comment from Christian in the chat. As I understand, is supporting the part on hop limit. There was also a comment from Karsten. Karsten, you want to elaborate on it?
Yeah, again, this is take it to the list question, but I'm just wondering whether the class U hop limit option actually might disclose more than we want to disclose. So we would have to think about specific attack scenarios in which this information might be substantially more useful than we think about right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're disclosing, but on the other hand, if the client chooses to add a hop limit option, it seems to me that they would want the actual proxies to see it, because otherwise, well, it will end up on the server, and the server doesn't really have anything cannot really act on it. So, but sure, you will change such that the origin client will not protect the hop limit option, while as things are today, you would protect it. So sure, there can be some kind of privacy concern or something we should mention with relation to this. Yeah.
So for instance, nested pairs of proxies might want to protect this information and not give a client that is using them the ability to circumvent that protection. So I think we just need to think about attack scenarios here, threat scenarios, and see whether it's unconditionally class U or maybe something that proxies may choose to ignore.
But I will also say that if you're using this document, then typically you would end up encrypting the option, because following the rule set, you would be able to encrypt the option hop by hop. So on the wire, it would be typically would be encrypted after all.
And Kirsten, commenting on your comment, at any rate, if one defines a class U option, it has to provide security privacy considerations, thinking about those things. So you just anticipated something that had to be done anyway.
Yes. Okay, I switch to the next presentation.
Yes. I can ask for it and give control to you.
Okay, thank you.
You should have control.
Perfect. So yeah, so now I wanted to move on to this next draft, which is about the key update for OSCORE, also known as Kudos. So just to recap what this is about, it's a key update solution for OSCORE, where you end up renewing your master secret and master salt, and thus deriving new sender and recipient keys. And these may be needed in certain situations where you have reached policies for how long you should use a certain key material. And there's also a separate draft specifically on key usage limits for OSCORE, where after using a key a certain number of times, it may not be secure to use that key anymore. And well, you achieve perfect forward secrecy with the solution. You don't end up changing the ID context value. It's agnostic of the key establishment method you originally used. You could have started from pre-shared key information or ad hoc or something else. It's loosely inspired by the Appendix B2 of OSCORE, which also provides a key update solution. So this is part one, and this is the current content of this draft. It used to actually have two other sections. The first being what they just mentioned, which is the AAD key usage limits for OSCORE, which specifies, let's say, safe number of times you may use a recipient or sender key in the context of OSCORE. This was split out as of March 2023 into its separate draft. And it also used to contain a procedure for updating the OSCORE and sender recipient IDs, which may be desired for privacy reasons. And this was also split out after discussion in March 2024. So it also lives in its own draft. And just a little bit more recap, you can see on the right-hand side the message flow. And fundamentally, it's built on exchanging two nonces, N1 and N2, between the pairs. And these nonces are transported in new fields that we defined for the OSCORE co-op option. And the nonces and some other information is taken as input to the update CTX function. And that basically takes your old master secret and keying material, the nonces, and then it will produce for you a new updated master secret. And that's how you actually perform the key update in practice. And here you can see also on the bottom left the extended format of the OSCORE option. And yeah, then I wanted to go into some of the updates we've done for version 8. So the first one being that we have a note now on when it's possible for the client to use the co-op no response option, because the actual message flow in Kudos can be quite flexible. So you send the Kudos request and you get a Kudos response, which is a response to that exact request, but it doesn't have to have such a strong tie. So what may happen is that the Kudos response 1 is in fact not a direct response to Kudos request 1, but it's just another response to an unrelated request. And if the client knows that this is to be the case, well, it may safely use the co-op no response option in its Kudos request 1, because that particular request does not require any response. The response will regardless come as response to a different request the client may have sent, or maybe there's observations ongoing, so there's a notification coming. We also have more detail now on avoiding potential problems when key updates start simultaneously. because it may be the case that two pairs, they both initiate and start kudos with each other in the exact the same time. So they send the kudos request one to each other, and then both pairs will act as initiator in that kudos execution. And when they receive the kudos request one, they will start acting as responder for the other pair's kudos execution. So you have really two executions ongoing at once. And basically, we don't want to both of these executions to finish, because then you may end up in not a good state, basically. And how did you solve this? Well, we simply say now in section 433 that if P1 is an initiator in a kudos execution E1 with P2, and P1 receives a first kudos message from P2 starting a kudos execution E2, so yet another second kudos execution ongoing at the same time, well, in that case, P1 must abort this new execution E2 and must reply to P2 with a co-op reset message to prevent that second execution from going ahead, since one is already happening at this moment in time. More updates. We clarified one thing, which is that when you derive a new OSCAR security context, which we do in kudos, the notification number in that context need to be set as uninitialized. And this notification number is used for replay detection of observed notifications. It comes from the OSCAR RFC, and it holds as a value the largest partial IV of received notifications for an associated observed registration. But the key thing here, what we want to do is really clarify that when kudos derives a new context, the notification number should be uninitialized. To not risk any problems, you shouldn't keep the previously held value for your starting security context. And we did some editorial improvements and fixes, clarifications. We did a large restructuring of the section about key update with forward secrecy, which was quite long. And now we split that into multiple subsections, and we also restructured and moved some of the content around, so it should be more readable now. We updated, we got some feedback from IANA about updating the, sorry, this was not about IANA feedback. What we did is we requested to update the OSCAR entry in the co-op option numbers registry with a reference to this document. And why did we do this? Well, because in the co-op options numbers registry entry for OSCAR, we felt it makes sense, because it's good to have a reference to this document, because this document is actually extending and changing the format of the OSCAR co-op option. So it's good to have a reference there. We extended security considerations. There was an interesting paper published which actually explicitly deals with kudos, and you see the paper name there and also a link. So we have now in the security considerations referred to that paper and taking relevant material from that paper and summarizing that to include in the security considerations. This was mostly about two things. One is that rekeying with a symmetric key exchange is not intended as like a full substitute for doing ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So because of that, it can be good that if pairs are able, they should periodically perform a key update based on ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key exchange, for instance, by running the ad hoc protocol. So you may have a situation where you do kudos for your regular key update, but then with less frequency and less often, you actually perform a execution of ad hoc. We also have some discussion now on possible deadlock situations on servers. It may be the case that a pair is only a co-op server, so it cannot send any requests. And if that kind of pair reaches its key usage limit for its OSCAR recipient key, well, that means it shouldn't decrypt any incoming messages, because then it will be using the recipient key. And that means it cannot execute kudos as initiator, because whenever the client is sending a request to the server, well, the server will be unable to decrypt this request. And there is a solution to this, which is that, well, the server will still be able to run kudos if the client starts kudos using the forward message flow. And we felt this was the best option, rather than starting to add exceptions, like you may have reached your key usage limits, but you can still use the key in very particular situations. But we felt that this is a simple solution rather than adding, and also a more secure solution. Oh yeah, so then I wanted to go into, like I mentioned, this document also contained this part about updating OSCORE sender recipient IDs. So I wanted to go into some updates that happened to that document also. Just as a recap, what this was about, well, it's about the procedure for updating sender recipient IDs for OSCORE. And you can actually embed this procedure into an execution of kudos, and you can also run it standalone. It can be initiated by either the client or the server, so both can take the initiative. And on the right-hand side there, you see a new co-op option we defined that is used for the peers to convey their desired new recipient ID to each other. And the way it works is that a peer will send a message indicating the new recipient ID it wants to have in this recipient ID option, which is class E. Both peers, of course, have to opt in and agree that this update is supposed to happen. Now that when you change IDs, practically what will happen is, because the IDs are part of the OSCORE security context derivation, when you change IDs, you will derive new OSCORE security context and thus also get new keying material. There's some security considerations around you shouldn't do this immediately following a reboot. In such case, it's recommended to use kudos first. And there's also some restrictions to kind of avoid reuse of recipient IDs that you need to be careful about, not using the same recipient ID that you previously used for a particular triple of master secret, master salt, and ID context. And we also have examples in 2.1.1 and 2.1.2 of this draft showing the exact message flow back and forth. But fundamentally, it's fairly basic. It's a request with the desired recipient ID of the client, a response, then including the desired recipient ID of the server. So what updates did we do? We specify now that the recipient ID option may be empty, because in OSCORE it's completely fine to have the empty byte string as your sender or recipient ID, and thus this option can be empty. And if it's empty, we clarify that the option value shall be empty, meaning option length 0. We expanded a bit on failure cases. When you're running this procedure together integrated with the kudos execution, it may be the case that the kudos procedure actually succeeds while the ID update procedure fails. And this could be for multiple reasons. For instance, maybe one peer doesn't want to change IDs. If this happens, well, since kudos succeeded, you should continue using this newly derived CTX new that kudos provided to you, and you simply keep using the old sender and recipient ID. Now, on the other hand, if the OSCORE ID update procedure succeeds while the kudos procedure fails, well, then you stay on your CTX old that you had before initiating kudos, so your previous security context you had without updating it. But of course, since the ID update procedure succeeded, you can proceed with using the new sender and recipient IDs that you decided to use. We also have another part about enforcing the maximum length of the recipient IDs. So we added this as a failure case, basically the length of the received recipient ID option. If that exceeds the maximum length of the OSCORE sender and recipient ID, which is based on it depends on the OSCORE AED algorithm you use. In such case, the procedure should be considered to have failed, because you cannot switch to a recipient ID that is too long and impossible to use with OSCORE. And specifically, the recipient ID option must not exceed the length of the AED nonce -6. And this comes from OSCORE, and that's basically based on like details on, for instance, how the OSCORE partial AV is calculated, but it's a restriction inherited from OSCORE. Yeah, so what do we want to do moving forward? Well, okay, I can mention briefly on the topic of the key usage limits document. We did submit a new version 3 without any major changes. Mostly we're monitoring any updates to the CFRG ADAD limits draft, which is kind of the draft that we're inheriting most of the information and then applying it specifically to OSCORE. And we're also waiting for possible feedback, because we've heard that there may be some people planning to give feedback on this in the future. Another big next step is we got a review from Chris and Amsis on the kudos document. So very much thank you for that. And you can see where it's archived there in a mail. So we plan to start going through that. And that will be probably the biggest goal until the next version. We also have now produced an implementation of kudos in Java supporting the forward message flow. And we also have a quite mature implementation in C for the Contiki NG operating system, which is an operating system for constrained devices. And this implementation currently supports the server side, so only acting as a server in the forward message flow. But that's ongoing work, and it will be updated to support more features. And yeah, as always, any comments or reviews or questions are very welcome. So thank you all for listening.
I have a question about your tie-breaking process. Usually when you need tie-breaking in a protocol, you try to make sure that both sides arrive at the same way forward. So if two peers start CUDA's update at exactly the same time, they will both receive the update request from the other side at a time when they have sent their request, and so they will both abort the other guy's update request. And then you're back at square one, and everybody will again send an update request, and they will collide again and go up in smoke.
Yeah,
so maybe having a tiebreak that has the same result who wins at the two ends would be better, like hashing the requests and looking at the least significant bit of the hash and decide which of the two ones wins or something like that.
I think we wanted to have a kind of a simple solution, and our plan is that it is basically fine if both of the CUDA's executions are aborted, because it's very unlikely that that this exact collision will happen again. But I'm sure there are more, like I said, there can be more advanced solutions with tiebreakers and such, but we felt it was just to not introduce more complexity into the solution overall, to have this very basic solution of, okay, yeah, abort, and sure, both may be aborted, but in such case, you can hope that then this is a very unlikely collision to happen in the first place, that they started exactly the same time.
Yeah, but even if you have an unlikely case that gives you a lifelock in the end, that's not a good situation. And I would expect that the sites that receive an abort are going to try again right away. Unless you have something that prevents them from doing that, it's no longer unlikely that this happens.
We may consider your solution, or something like, if you get a reset, you should back off and you shouldn't immediately retry.
There is a concrete solution for that very topic in my review that basically makes even allows a simultaneously started process to complete by making sure that the operations commute.
Nice,
Okay,
thank you.
So yeah, we haven't managed to process your review yet, but that sounds very promising then. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comment, question? Anyone? And just note in the chat that Carsten appreciated the reference to John's paper, by the way, on the security considerations. Okay, if there are no more questions, thanks, Richard, again. And next and last in line is Carlos.
Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Gomez, and I'm going to present two drafts which are related, the updated versions of these drafts. And by the way, thanks a lot to everyone who has provided comments on both drafts. Actually, it's very good feedback. Thanks. So the first document is entitled Co-op in Space. My co-author here is Sergio Aguilar from Sateliot. Next, please. So this is a summary of the updates. First of all, we have extended the scope, which originally was about deep space. However, now the scope is spatial environments characterized by long delays and intermittent communication opportunities. So this now includes also some LEO satellite-based scenarios, such as those composed of sparse satellite constellations, where the satellites offer discontinuous coverage, and then they require storm forward support as well. And by the way, there are extensions that are being standardized by the 3GPP to support this kind of scenario in release 19. Then we've added the section on caching, and we explain there that the max age value needs to be set according to the expected latency of the scenario, the intended scenario. Of course, as long as it makes sense to consider the response is still fresh after that max age time. Fortunately, the possible values that we can represent with the existing specifications for max age is up to 136 years. So hopefully this should cover our current requirements for delay-tolerant applications. Then in section 5, which was already existing on observe, we have added that if the time between the two last notifications received is greater than 128 seconds, by default, the last one is also considered the latest one sent by the server. So this may be relevant to some applications. And now we've added that in delay-tolerant environments, the duration of 128 seconds may need to be chosen greater than that amount of time. Actually, 128 seconds was chosen to be greater than the max latency, which by default in CoAP is 100 seconds. But now in deep space, for instance, max latency may have to be increased by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. Next, please. We have also added the section on CoAP group communication. And among others, there is, well, one parameter, which is the minimum token reuse time, which with the default CoAP settings and the setting for another parameter, which is in the current CoAP group communication draft, the total time for minimum token reuse time by default would be 500 seconds. So again, in delay-tolerant environments, this would need to be set according to the expected latency of the scenario. And again, in deep space, it would need to be increased by maybe at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, depending on each specific case. Then in section 8 about security, we have added that group score protocol is used to secure CoAP group communication, and also about OSCORE. I think this was a comment from Christian, that OSCORE provides this protection against replay attacks. And by default, it uses an anti-replay sliding window with a window size of 32. So if a greater window size is needed, because we are using CoAP in a scenario with much higher latency, then the window size needs to be known by both endpoints at the moment of security context establishment. Next, please. Yeah, so those were the main updates in the first draft. The other one is CoAP over bundle protocol, also at version 0.1 here. And my co-author in this draft is Ana Calveras, also, well, we are both from UPC. Next, please. So we have added a section in this draft on the encapsulating bundle, the bundle that encapsulates a CoAP message. So here we provide details about that bundle. So the first item was already present in the document, but in a different section. So what's new is the other bullets. The second one is that the lifetime field of the encapsulating bundle, in our draft, we state that it must be set to exchange lifetime for CoAP con messages or to non-lifetime for CoAP non-messages. Of course, with those lifetimes set according to the scenario. Then also because the bundle protocol doesn't have the notion of what is a response, we have added some simple logic about it. And we state that the destination endpoint ID for the bundle encapsulating CoAP response would be the source node ID of the sender of the bundle that carries the CoAP message that triggers that response, and vice versa. And also, we tentatively added some text like the CoAP aggregation, well, the aggregation of CoAP messages may be done. Several messages may be aggregated in the same bundle. So there was some recent feedback on this topic by Karsten on the list that perhaps we can do that by using the RFC 8323 message format. So yeah, we're going to use that in the next version of the draft. Next, please. Then in section 9, it's about the URI scheme. You may recall that in the previous version of the draft, we attempted to create a new URI scheme for co-op over BP, something like co-op plus BP. However, after receiving the feedback from this working group, now we state that the URI scheme for co-op over B is co-op. Actually, we follow the recommendations, the guidance in the transport indication draft. So thanks a lot, because it's very useful. And also to create the authority component of the URI, now we request the creation of two new reserved domains in the .arpa namespace, which would lead to the suffixes .dtn.arpa and .ipn.arpa. So also in the draft, we have the full domain name reservation considerations in the IANA consideration section, following the guidance of RFC 6761. And here you can see a couple of examples, in this case, which would be the URI of the discovery resource when using co-op over BP. So yeah, by the way, in BP, there are like two types of endpoint IDs. One which uses the DTN : / and then a name, and the other one which uses IPN : and then the node number, the delimiter, which is a dot, and then the service number. So yeah, you can see the examples how that URI of the discovery resource would be for each type of endpoint ID. And by the way, there is also some comment here about, so what you can see currently is the content of the draft, but we're going to change one of the two transformations here for the next update of the draft. Actually, for the IPN-based URI, we would need to change the order of the service number and the node number. So instead of co-op : / / 81.2, it should be the other way around, because, well, this was some comment by Karsten, and yeah, probably that makes more sense than the existing proposal here, to keep the hierarchy and the order in the authority component of the URI. So next, please. Then we have added a section on securing co-op over BP. First, we explained that the co-op-based specification defines a binding to DTLS, and then also there is OSCORE, which can be used to provide end-to-end application layer payload protection. And one interesting feature of OSCORE is that it's based on a shared security context, which may be based on pre-shared materials, which avoids initial handshake. So this is, well, one problem that DTLS has, and involves some performance penalty, especially in these environments where latency is high. So this is why in the draft we state that for co-op over BP, use of DTLS is not recommended. And on the other hand, we explain that BPSec provides security services for BP. It provides integrity and/or confidentiality for one or more blocks of a bundle. And on the other hand, OSCORE protects with confidentiality and integrity the co-op message payload, one co-op message header field, and also some co-op options. So we need to develop a bit more this section, and in particular, since it's possible to have security at 2 layers, okay, should we use both at the same time, or maybe only one, in which cases? So yeah, we need to develop this. And also any input you may have on this point is very much welcome. And next, please. So finally, this is like a summary of some point, some item that triggered some comments. You may recall that in this draft, we suggest somewhat tentatively to increase the co-op message ID size from 16 bits to 24 bits. The reason is trying to avoid the limitation that might be a bit severe on the message rate for a co-op endpoint, especially when you have very long delays and therefore a very long exchange lifetime. However, there are some cons, such as an additional byte of header overhead and also somewhat increased memory requirements for the endpoints to keep track of the message IDs used. So I don't know if there may be opinions on this, or say strong opinions, like to decide whether it makes sense to continue suggesting the use of 24 bits for the message ID. And yeah, that's actually the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Carlos. I can tell you Christian has 3 questions prepared in the notes. In the interest of time, maybe Christian, do you want to pick up one of those and then follow up on the list?
I think that the most prominent there is probably in the deep space IP meeting. I've heard a lot of discussion of very high bandwidth links. It might be worth considering whether you might have proxies in between, and then if those links support QUIC already, use that and solve other problems like having those extreme round trip times between some pairs that share message IDs, or that would need extra considerations for the tokens, because then those tokens are like segmented to a particular region in space.
Okay, thank you. By the way, one comment is that I think there are different types of links being used or proposed for using in deep space. For instance, some of them are very low bit rate, others maybe much higher bit rate. So, but yeah, anyway, yeah, of course, what you mentioned applies. Thank you.
Bill, you have a quick question?
Hi, it's Bill Silverajan. I'm aware that we are running out of time, but I had a couple of comments. Just bear with me. So actually, I think my comments basically are mostly for the co-op in space draft and not so much on the BP. But something that you mentioned, the BP draft also kind of resonated. But just going back to the space draft. So there was something about use of observe, and then you're recommending the latency time. So I'd suggest that you look also in the conditional attributes draft, which discusses pmin, pmax, epmin, epmax for that, and perhaps also pubsub. That might help something. So coming back to the question about BP, so we did a lot of work also on co-op, running it over low Earth orbit satellites and geosynchronous satellites, and we did a lot of work on this kind of delay tolerant co-op. And I kind of echo the same thing that you mentioned, that running it over DTLS is not really recommended. But that's not specific to BP. It's specific to any sort of transport that has very high latency. So something that we can discuss offline afterwards. But yeah, I can share my experiences with what you have. So perhaps that should be put in the space draft as well, or somewhere else.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. And Bill and Christian especially, but everyone, please follow up on the list with more comments for Carlos. Okay, thank you. We are 2 minutes over time. Thank you very much for the good meeting, your participation and contribution. See you at the interim meetings and in Dublin in November, hopefully. Thank you all. Thanks to the note takers.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.